Have you ever witnessed a moment so charged with arrogance you could feel the air crackle? A moment where someone, dripping in wealth and privilege, decides another person is simply not worthy of sharing the same space? We often see such ugly displays go unchecked, but what happens when that venom is directed at the one person you should never, ever cross? Today's story takes us to the rarefied air of a first-class cabin, 30,000 feet in the sky, where a woman's hateful words set off a chain reaction of karmic justice so swift and so complete, it will leave you breathless. The atmosphere inside the Sterling Airlines first-class lounge at JFK was a carefully curated symphony of tranquility. The lighting was soft, mimicking the gentle glow of a late-afternoon sun, even as rain lashed against the panoramic windows overlooking the tarmac. The air smelled of expensive leather, fresh orchids, and the faint, clean scent of brewing Earl Grey tea. It was a sanctuary designed to insulate its patrons from the chaotic energy of the airport, a bubble of privilege and peace. Dr. Alice Vance found a quiet armchair in a secluded corner, the rich mahogany of a small table beside her, holding a simple glass of sparkling water. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored navy blue silk blouse and matching trousers, an ensemble that spoke of quiet confidence and effortless elegance rather than overt wealth. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, revealing delicate pearl earrings. At 42, her face was a canvas of calm intelligence, her dark eyes sharp and observant, currently scanning the final draft of a speech on a sleek, ultra-thin tablet. Alice was not just successful. She was a titan in a field dominated by men. With a PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT, she had founded Vance Aeronautics a decade ago on the back of a revolutionary patent for a carbon nanofiber composite material. Her material was lighter, stronger, and more resilient than anything on the market, promising to redefine aircraft construction. She was flying to Geneva for the World Aviation Symposium, where she was the keynote speaker. More than that, she was on the cusp of signing a multi-billion-dollar exclusive contract with Sterling Airlines to supply the fuselage and wing components for their new dream fleet of long-haul aircraft. This deal wasn't just a business transaction, it was the culmination of her life's work. A polite announcement, a soft chime followed by a cultured voice, informed the first-class passengers that flight SA-212 to Geneva was now boarding. Alice gathered her belongings, sliding her tablet into a slim leather briefcase. As she walked towards the private jet bridge, her gait was measured and purposeful. She was accustomed to the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, reactions her presence could elicit in these spaces. The double takes, the fleeting looks of confusion, the unspoken question. How did she get here? She had learned long ago to wear an armor of graceful indifference, her focus always on the destination, never the turbulence of other people's prejudice. She found her seat, Suite 1A, a private cocoon of cream-colored leather and polished burled wood. It was her favorite seat on the A380, offering both a window view and a sense of complete privacy. She stowed her briefcase, settled into the plush seat that felt more like a throne, and prepared to spend the 7-hour flight making final annotations to her speech. She was in her element, a state of focused, quiet preparation, soaring towards the pinnacle of her career. The calm was broken by the arrival of the passengers for seats 1C and 1D. A woman in her late 50s, who seemed to be sculpted from disapproval, led the way. Her name was Charlotte Wexler, and she wore her wealth like a weapon. A diamond necklace glittered aggressively at her throat, competing with the large diamond studs in her ears and the constellation of rings on her fingers. Her blonde hair was coiffed into a rigid, lacquered helmet, and her face was a mask of expensive cosmetics and disdain. She was draped in a Chanel suit that screamed its price tag across the cabin. Following in her wake was her husband, Robert, a man who had been so thoroughly diminished over the years that he seemed to fold in on himself. His shoulders were slumped inside his well-tailored but slightly rumpled suit, his eyes darting around nervously, as if constantly anticipating his wife's next outburst. Charlotte stopped dead in the aisle, her eyes landing on Alice. She didn't so much look at her as through her. She performed a slow, deliberate scan, from Alice's simple pearl earrings to her understated shoes. A faint, contemptuous sniff escaped her nostrils. She turned to Robert and, in a stage whisper designed to be overheard, said, "I don't know why they keep lowering the standards. First class used to feel so much more exclusive." Robert flinched, his eyes flicking towards Alice with a hint of apology before quickly looking away. "Charlotte, please," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Alice felt the familiar, dull sting of the slight. It was an old wound, one she had learned to ignore, but whose scar tissue never quite faded. She didn't look up from her tablet, didn't offer the reaction Charlotte so clearly craved. Instead, she magnified a schematic of a wing stress test on her screen, her focus an impenetrable shield. Giving these moments oxygen was the surest way to let them burn. Charlotte, annoyed at being ignored, made a production of settling into her seat. She snapped her fingers at a young flight attendant named Chloe, who hurried over with a warm smile. "My carry-on," Charlotte commanded, gesturing to a Louis Vuitton bag Robert was struggling to lift. "Put it away for me, and get me a glass of the Taitinger. Make sure it's properly chilled. The last time I flew, it was practically lukewarm." "Of course, ma'am," Chloe said, her smile never faltering as she professionally stowed the bag and hurried off to the galley. As the cabin doors were secured and the plane began its slow pushback from the gate, Alice allowed herself a moment to look out the window. She watched the ground crew in their bright vests scurry below, a complex ballet of human and machine working in concert to launch this metal bird into the sky. It was a process she understood, down to the last rivet and algorithm. It was her world, and she would not let the petty ugliness of one insecure woman tarnish the beauty of it. But as the engine spooled up with a rising, powerful whine, she had a fleeting sense of foreboding, a feeling that this journey would be anything but smooth. The initial ascent of the Airbus A380 was a masterpiece of controlled power. The behemoth aircraft climbed through the bruised, rainy sky over New York with a grace that belied its size, eventually breaking through the cloud cover into the brilliant, impossible blue of the upper atmosphere. Inside the first-class cabin, the gentle hum of the engines was a soothing white noise, and the flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency, transforming the space into a high-altitude fine dining restaurant. Alice had put the earlier incident with Charlotte Wexler out of her mind. She was deeply engrossed in her work, a pair of noise-cancelling headphones on, listening not to music, but to a recording of a previous speech she'd given, critiquing her own cadence and tone. A linen napkin was laid on the console beside her, next to a fresh glass of water with a twist of lime. She was in her zone. The dinner service began. Chloe, the flight attendant who had borne the brunt of Charlotte's initial condescension, approached Alice with a warm, genuine smile. "Dr. Vance, may I get you something to drink before your meal? We have a lovely Sancerre that would pair beautifully with the seared scallops." "That sounds wonderful, Chloe." "Thank you," Alice replied, removing her headphones and returning the smile. She appreciated the young woman's professionalism and the subtle respect of being addressed by her title. Across the aisle, Charlotte watched this exchange with narrowed eyes. She had been stewing since boarding, her sense of entitlement pricked by Alice's calm indifference. It was one thing to be ignored, but it was another to witness the object of her scorn being treated with such deference. In Charlotte's rigidly hierarchical world, this was a malfunction in the system. When Chloe approached her, Charlotte's voice was sharp. "I'll have the Bordeaux, the Grand Puy Lacoste, and I want to see the bottle before you pour." She waved a dismissive hand. "And this water is unacceptable. It has no ice. Is it so difficult to remember ice?" "My apologies, Mrs. Wexler. I'll get you a fresh glass right away," Chloe said, her composure unshakable. As Chloe turned to go to the galley, Charlotte clumsily reached for a small bowl of olives on her console. It was a movement that was both jerky and theatrical. Her elbow knocked her full glass of sparkling water, sending it tipping over in a perfect glittering arc, directly onto Alice's table. The cold water cascaded over the leather console, soaking the edge of Alice's silk blouse, and, to her horror, splashing across the stack of printed notes for her keynote address. The ink on the top pages immediately began to bleed, the carefully chosen words blurring into meaningless blue smudges. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Alice's breath caught in her throat. Those notes weren't just a script. They were filled with handwritten annotations, last-minute calculations, and conceptual diagrams she had sketched out. They were irreplaceable. Robert Wexler gasped. "Oh my goodness, Charlotte, look what you've done!" But Charlotte felt a surge of triumphant satisfaction. She had finally gotten a reaction. Instead of apologizing, she went on the offensive, her voice rising in pitch to attract maximum attention. "Oh, for heaven's sake, it's just water, but look what you made me do," she exclaimed, pointing an accusatory, jewel-laden finger at Alice. "You shouldn't have all your papers spread out like that. It's so cluttered. People like you need to be more careful in a confined space." The phrase "people like you" hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was no longer a microaggression. It was a declaration of war. Alice slowly looked up from her ruined notes, her dark eyes locking with Charlotte's. Her initial shock was rapidly being replaced by a cold, controlled anger. "Mom," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "you spilled your drink. You have damaged my property and my work. A simple apology would suffice." "Apologize?" Charlotte scoffed, her voice growing louder. "I should apologize for your carelessness. Unbelievable. I highly doubt you can even afford this seat in the first place. Let me guess, you used frequent flyer miles from some corporate diversity program, or perhaps a stolen credit card. Is that it?" The accusation was so outrageous it took Alice's breath away. The other handful of passengers in the first-class cabin were now staring, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Chloe rushed back to the scene with a handful of linen napkins. "Ma'am, please, it was an accident. Let me help you, Dr. Vance." "Don't you touch her things," Charlotte shrieked, batting Chloe's hand away. "She's probably looking for a lawsuit. I know her type. I want this woman removed from my sight. She is harassing me, and she is making me deeply uncomfortable. I pay for a premium service, and I will not be subjected to this intrusion." The head purser, a distinguished older man named David, arrived, drawn by the commotion. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Wexler?" "Yes, there is a problem," Charlotte bellowed, now fully playing to the audience. "This passenger is a threat. I don't feel safe. She has no business being in this cabin, and your staff is defending her. I want to speak to the captain immediately. I want her moved to the back of the plane where she belongs." Alice stood up slowly, her 5'9" frame seeming to tower over the seated Charlotte. The armor of indifference had cracked, revealing the formidable strength beneath. "Your behavior is appalling," she said, her voice low but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Your accusations are not only baseless and defamatory, but they are rooted in a prejudice so ugly it is frankly astonishing. Now, you will stop speaking to me, and you will stop harassing the crew." The standoff was absolute. The cabin was electric with tension. Charlotte, her face flushed with rage and indignation, opened her mouth to unleash another tirade. But before she could utter a sound, a calm, masculine voice cut through the air from the seat behind them. "That is quite enough." The voice came from Suite 2A. It was not loud, but it possessed a natural resonance of command that instantly silenced the cabin. Every head turned towards the man who was now standing. He was in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and a face that was lined with experience rather than age. He was dressed in a simple, dark grey cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, understated, but clearly of the highest quality. He had been quietly reading a book since boarding, an unobtrusive presence until this very moment. This was Julian Sterling. He exuded an aura of immense, unshowy power. It was in the way he stood, the stillness of his posture, the piercing clarity of his blue eyes. He took in the scene with a single, sweeping glance. Charlotte's contorted, furious face, Robert's pathetic, cowering form, Chloe's distressed but professional expression, and finally, Alice, standing tall, her composure a mask of ice over a core of fire. Charlotte, seeing a well-dressed, powerful-looking white man, immediately assumed he was an ally, a kindred spirit from her world. A relieved, triumphant smile spread across her face. "Thank you," she gushed, turning her attention fully to him. Finally, someone with some sense. "This woman," she said, jabbing a finger towards Alice, "has been a complete menace since we boarded. She's aggressive. She doesn't belong here, and the staff, for some reason, is coddling her. I was just telling them she needs to be removed." Julian Sterling's expression remained unreadable. He took a deliberate step into the aisle, his movements economical and precise. He didn't look at Charlotte. Instead, his gaze rested on Chloe. "Miss," he said, his voice calm and respectful, "could you please tell me what happened?" Chloe, startled to be addressed so directly, straightened her back. "Yes, sir." Mrs. Wexler was gesturing while she spoke and accidentally knocked over her glass of water. It spilled onto Dr. Vance's personal documents. When I tried to help, Mrs. Wexler began yelling, accusing Dr. Vance of causing the spill and making other accusations. Julian nodded slowly, his eyes shifting to the head purser, David. "Is that an accurate summary?" "Yes, sir, completely," David affirmed, his relief palpable. Only then did Julian Sterling turn his cool, penetrating gaze upon Charlotte Wexler. When he spoke, his voice was still quiet, but it had acquired an edge of tempered steel that sent a shiver down Robert's spine. "Ma'am, I was also a witness to this entire exchange. I heard your comments when you boarded. I saw you knock over the glass, and I heard, with perfect clarity, your subsequent accusations. They are not only baseless, but they are also a direct violation of Section 12, subsection C, of the conditions of carriage for this airline, which strictly prohibits the harassment or intimidation of fellow passengers and crew." Charlotte's triumphant smile faltered. She was not being supported. She was being lectured. "And who are you?" she sneered, her arrogance fighting back against a rising tide of unease. "To be quoting airline regulations at me. The air marshal, a lawyer, it doesn't matter. I am the victim here. I am a Diamond Medallion member, and I demand to speak to someone in charge. Get me the captain." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of Julian Sterling's lips. It did not reach his eyes. The captain is currently occupied with the rather important task of flying this aircraft across the Atlantic Ocean. But as for speaking to someone in charge, he paused for a beat, letting the weight of the moment settle. I suppose I will have to do. He extended a hand, not to her, but in a general gesture to the aircraft around them. This is my airline. My name is Julian Sterling. The name dropped into the pressurized silence of the cabin like a 10-ton weight. Charlotte Wexler's jaw literally fell open, the blood drained from her face, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a garish, painted mask on a corpse. Robert Wexler made a small, strangled noise in the back of his throat and looked as if he might faint. He knew the name. Everyone in the world of high finance and industry knew that name. Julian Sterling wasn't just a CEO. He was a legend, the patriarch who had inherited a small cargo airline from his father and built it into a global passenger empire. He was famously private, almost never flew on his own commercial flights, and was known for his ruthless business acumen and zero tolerance for incompetence. The other passengers who had been watching the drama unfold were now staring in stunned disbelief. They were not just witnessing a confrontation, they were witnessing a corporate execution at 30,000 feet. But the most shocking moment was yet to come. Julian Sterling completely ignored the Wexlers' collective meltdown. He turned his full attention to Alice, and his entire demeanor transformed. The icy authority melted away, replaced by a look of profound warmth, respect, and genuine concern. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice now imbued with a deep, personal courtesy, "I am so dreadfully sorry. To have you as a guest on my airline, and for you to be subjected to this abhorrent behavior is unforgivable. I am utterly mortified." He stepped closer and offered his hand. "I'm Julian Sterling. I was so hoping I'd have the chance to introduce myself properly during the flight. I can't tell you what an honor it is to have you on board." If Charlotte Wexler's world had frozen when Julian Sterling announced his name, it shattered into a million pieces at his next words. The name Dr. Vance suddenly clicked into place, not as a title of academic respect, but as a brand. Vance Aeronautics. The connection was instantaneous and catastrophic. Alice, momentarily taken aback by the sudden shift in events, shook Julian's offered hand. "Mr. Sterling, it's a pleasure, though I wish the circumstances were better." "Indeed," Julian said, his eyes conveying a sincere apology. He glanced at her ruined notes. "I trust that wasn't the only copy of your speech for the symposium?" "It wasn't the only copy, but it was my working copy. The loss is inconvenient," Alice admitted, her voice tight with frustration. "We will do everything in our power to rectify that," Julian assured her. He then turned his attention back to the wider audience, his voice regaining its command. "But first, let's address the more pressing issue." He looked directly at Charlotte, whose face was now a mess of confusion and dawning horror. Her brain was furiously trying to process the new reality. This black woman, this intrusion she had deemed unworthy of her presence, was not just some random passenger. She was a VIP, a guest of the owner, a business partner. The name on the company, Vance Aeronautics, suddenly blared in her mind like a fire alarm. Her husband, Robert, had been talking about that company for months. Robert's business, Wexler Logistics, was a mid-tier shipping and supply chain company that was teetering on the edge of insolvency. Their last, desperate hope for survival was securing a contract to manage the global distribution of raw materials for a major manufacturing firm. For the past 6 months, Robert had been pouring all his resources into a single, high-stakes bid to become the exclusive logistics partner for Vance Aeronautics. He had called it the deal of a lifetime, the one that would save their company and their fortune. Robert looked from Alice to Julian to his wife, his face ashen. He looked like a man who had just watched his own executioner sharpen the axe. All the blood had drained from his face, and a fine sheen of cold sweat covered his forehead. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Charlotte, finally grasping the cataclysmic scale of her mistake, began to stammer. Mr. Sterling, there has been a terrible misunderstanding. I was feeling unwell. The altitude. I didn't mean. I wasn't myself. Her voice was a pathetic, sycophantic whine, a complete reversal of her earlier screeching. Julian Sterling watched her grovel, his expression one of utter disgust. He held up a hand to silence her. Mrs. Wexler, I believe I understand perfectly. You saw a black woman in first class and concluded that she could not possibly belong there. You then proceeded to insult, harass, and assault her, while also abusing my staff. Your explanation is not only pathetic, it is insulting to my intelligence. He turned to the head purser. David. Yes, Mr. Sterling? Please find Dr. Vance a replacement blouse from our on-board first-class collection. I believe we have some from Lafayette 148 that should be suitable. Take her notes to the galley. Use the low-heat press in the laundry unit to see if you can dry them without further damage. And please, bring Dr. Vance a fresh glass of the Sancerre. He then looked at Chloe, who had been standing by, watching with wide eyes. Chloe, your professionalism under extreme duress was exemplary. See me before we land. We need more people with your grace and composure in leadership positions at this airline. Chloe blushed, a look of stunned gratitude on her face. Thank you, sir. Finally, Julian Sterling delivered the verdict to the Wexlers. His voice was devoid of all emotion, as cold and final as a judge's gavel. David, he said, not even deigning to look at Charlotte and Robert again, please escort Mr. and Mrs. Wexler to the 2 unoccupied seats in row 54. I believe 54E and 54F are available. Row 54, the very last row of economy, non-reclining, right next to the lavatories. Charlotte gasped, a strangled, horrified sound. You can't! We're in first class! We paid for these seats. I have a heart condition. I have anxiety. I need the leg room. Julian turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto hers with chilling intensity. What you need, madam, is a lesson in basic human decency, a lesson you are tragically overdue to learn. Your first-class fare will be refunded in full. However, you will be charged for 2 last-minute, full-fare economy tickets. The difference will be credited to your account. You will move to your new seats now, or you will be restrained by the crew and handed over to airport security upon our arrival in Geneva for interfering with a flight crew and assaulting a passenger. The choice is yours. Robert Wexler finally found his voice. It was a weak, trembling whisper. We'll move. Right now. We're so sorry. He grabbed his wife's arm, trying to haul her out of the seat. Charlotte, however, was frozen in a state of shock and humiliation. The walk of shame was the ultimate social punishment in her world. To be paraded from the pinnacle of luxury, past the business-class pods and the premium economy recliners, all the way to the ignominy of the back row. It was a fate worse than death. The silent, judgmental eyes of the other passengers would be like physical blows. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please. Now, Julian Sterling said. The single word carried the force of an avalanche. With David the purser waiting impassively in the aisle, Robert managed to pull his wife to her feet. As they were led away from the sanctuary of first class, every eye was on them. There was no sympathy in those gazes. There was only a quiet, satisfying sense of order being restored. Alice watched them go, feeling not a sense of triumph, but a profound sense of exhaustion and sorrow that such a scene was ever necessary. As Charlotte passed her, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In Charlotte's, Alice saw not remorse, but the raw, unadulterated venom of pure hatred. The problem hadn't been solved, it had just been relocated. The 7-hour flight to Geneva unfolded on 2 entirely different planes of existence. In first class, a sense of serene order was quickly restored. Julian Sterling insisted Alice take his suite, 2A, which was untouched by the water spill, while the crew meticulously worked on her own. He was a surprisingly down-to-earth and engaging conversationalist. He apologized again, more profusely this time, for the disgraceful incident. "Dr. Vance, Alice, if I may," he began, once they were settled with fresh drinks. "I want you to understand that the behavior you witnessed is the antithesis of everything Sterling Airlines stands for. Character, integrity, and respect are the pillars of this company. To see them so flagrantly violated, and towards a guest who represents the very future of our industry, it's deeply disturbing." "I appreciate that, Julian," Alice replied, finding herself warming to the man's genuine sincerity. "Unfortunately, it's not an entirely unfamiliar experience. It's just usually more subtle." They spent the next few hours not as business partners finalizing a deal, but as 2 intellectual equals sharing their passions. They talked about the future of aviation, the challenges of sustainable fuel, the elegant mathematics of aerodynamics. Julian was fascinated by the technical details of her composite material, and Alice was impressed by his deep understanding of the industry, not just from a business perspective, but from a genuine love of flight. By the time the meal service concluded, the multi-billion-dollar contract was no longer a matter of negotiation. It felt like a partnership between old friends. The deal was sealed on a handshake, stronger than any document lawyers could draft. Meanwhile, 70 rows back, in the purgatory of 54E and 50-F, the Wexler's world was imploding. The seats were as dreadful as advertised. Wedged into the narrowest part of the fuselage, the proximity to the bustling lavatories meant a constant stream of people, queuing and bumping past, accompanied by the intermittent flushing and the chemical smell of the blue toilet water. For Charlotte, who had just been cocooned in a private suite with lie-flat beds and a personal minibar, it was a descent into hell. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional inferno raging between them. For the first hour, Charlotte sat in stony, seething silence. Then, the dam of her fury broke. "This is all your fault," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. Robert, who had been staring blankly at the seat back in front of him, turned to her in disbelief. "My fault! My fault! Charlotte, I have never been more humiliated in my entire life. You, with your poison, with your disgusting snobbish attitude, you just detonated a nuclear bomb in the middle of our lives. Did you hear him? That was Dr. Alice Vance, Vance Aeronautics. How was I supposed to know who she was?" Charlotte shot back, her voice rising. She was dressed so plainly. She didn't look like anyone important. She didn't look important? Robert's voice trembled with a rage he hadn't expressed in 20 years of marriage. "Because she's black, Charlotte. Is that it? You saw a black woman, and your brain just short-circuited. I have been working for 6 months, day and night, killing myself to land that logistics contract. It was our last chance, our only chance. We are leveraged to the hilt. The bank is about to call in our loans. That contract was going to save us, and you just spat in her face in front of the one man who could have helped us." Tears of rage and self-pity welled in Charlotte's eyes. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. I built you. Our social connections, our friends, that's all because of me. You'd be nothing without me." "Our friends?" Robert let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "They're your friends, Charlotte. They tolerate me because I pay for the country club membership and the charity galas. And now? Now we have nothing. You didn't just insult a potential business partner. You did it in a cabin filled with the very people whose opinions you cherish more than anything. I saw at least 3 people I know from the board of the Philharmonic. Do you think this story isn't going to be the talk of the town by the time we land?" The reality of his words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Her social standing was the bedrock of her identity. The thought of the whispers, the snickers behind her back at the next charity auction, was more terrifying than financial ruin. The rest of the flight was a cold, silent war. They were no longer a couple. They were 2 individuals, trapped in a metal tube, tethered only by their shared, spectacular ruin. Upon landing in Geneva, the karma began to accelerate. As passengers deplaned, Alice and Julian were the first to be escorted off, met by a private car on the tarmac. As the Wexlers shuffled off the plane with the economy-class masses, Robert turned on his phone. It immediately buzzed, a frantic cascade of emails and texts. The first one he opened was from his company's chief financial officer. The subject line read, "Urgent Emergency Board Meeting." The body of the email was short and brutal. Word of the incident on the flight had already reached several board members. A passenger in business class, the CEO of a rival company, had texted a board member as soon as the plane had Wi-Fi. The story was spreading through their industry's elite circles like wildfire. The board was convening in 1 hour to discuss the catastrophic reputational damage and to vote on his immediate suspension as CEO. His blood ran cold. He clicked on the next email. It was from the acquisitions department at Vance Aeronautics. "Mr. Wexler, in light of recent events, we are formally withdrawing our invitation to tender for the global logistics contract. Your company has been removed from our list of potential vendors, effective immediately." It was over. Everything he had worked for his entire life, gone. Destroyed in a 7-hour flight by his wife's uncontrollable prejudice. He looked over at Charlotte, who was busy checking her own phone. The color was draining from her face as well. An email from the chairwoman of the Children's Hospital Charity Gala, the pinnacle of her social calendar, informed her that her position as co-chair was being re-evaluated and that it would be best for all involved if she did not attend the upcoming planning luncheon. They stood there, amidst the bustling, anonymous crowd of Geneva Airport, 2 ghosts at their own funeral, the full, devastating consequences of Charlotte's hateful words just beginning to rain down upon them. The week that followed was a slow, agonizing dissection of the life the Wexlers had built. The karmic fallout was not a single, explosive event, but a relentless, cascading series of failures, each one triggered by the last. For Robert, the emergency board meeting was a slaughter. He dialed in from his hotel room in Geneva, a pale, haggard figure on a Zoom screen. The story of what happened on the flight had been embellished with each retelling, but the core facts remained. He had stood by silently while his wife verbally assaulted a key business prospect in a racist tirade, a scene witnessed by the very owner of the airline. He was portrayed not just as the husband of a bigot, but as a weak, ineffectual leader who lacked the spine to control his own wife, let alone a multinational corporation. The vote for his removal was unanimous. He was offered a paltry severance package, contingent on signing an ironclad, non-disclosure agreement. By the end of the call, the company he had inherited from his father was no longer his. The financial repercussions were swift. With the Vance Aeronautics deal gone and the news of Robert's ousting circulating, their company's stock plummeted. The banks, which had been patient, saw the writing on the wall. They called in their loans. Wexler Logistics, unable to meet its obligations, was forced to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 72 hours. The company was finished, destined to be carved up and sold for parts. For Charlotte, the punishment was social rather than financial, but to her, it was infinitely more painful. The other passengers from that flight were a well-connected group. The story of her airplane meltdown became a delicious piece of gossip, spreading through the exclusive circles of New York and Palm Beach with viral speed. The email from the Children's Hospital was just the beginning. The next day, she was politely asked to resign from the board of the Modern Art Museum. The day after, her membership at the exclusive Sunrise Golf Club was suspended pending a review. The friends who had once flocked to her lavish dinner parties now sent her calls to voicemail. Invitations dried up. When she walked into her favorite upscale boutique on Madison Avenue, the staff, who usually fawned over her, suddenly became intensely busy, unable to make eye contact. She had become a pariah, a social leper. The very identity she had so carefully constructed over decades, Charlotte Wexler, the powerful socialite, the tastemaker, the philanthropist, had been erased. She was now just Charlotte Wexler, the racist woman from the airplane. The flight back to New York was a mirror image of their trip to Geneva. They flew commercial, in economy, their gold status cards already deactivated. They didn't speak a word to each other. They sat in a suffocating silence, the weight of their collapsed world pressing down on them. When they arrived at their sprawling mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, a place that had once been Charlotte's palace and stage, it felt like a tomb. A for sale sign was already being hammered into the manicured front lawn by a realtor Robert had called from the airport. That evening, as they sat in the cavernous marble kitchen, surrounded by a life they could no longer afford, Robert finally broke the silence. He slid a stack of legal documents across the polished granite island towards her. "What is this?" Charlotte asked, her voice brittle. "It's a divorce petition," Robert said, his voice flat, devoid of the anger and panic of the previous week. All that was left was a hollow emptiness. "The lawyers are filing it tomorrow morning. I'm moving out tonight." Charlotte stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You're leaving me? After all this? After everything I did for you?" Robert let out a dry, rasping sound that might have been a laugh. "Everything you did for me? Charlotte, you did this to me. To us. For years I have tolerated your moods, your snobbery, your cruelty to anyone you deemed beneath you. I told myself it was just your way. I enabled it. I paid for it. I am just as much to blame for what you've become. But I will not be your collateral damage any longer." He stood up. "The house will be sold to pay the creditors. The accounts have been frozen. What little is left will be divided. I suggest you find a good lawyer." He looked at her one last time, at the woman he had spent 30 years with, and he felt nothing. No love, no hate, only a vast, weary pity. "You chased away every last bit of warmth and decency in our lives, Charlotte. I hope all your things keep you company, because you are finally, completely alone." He picked up a small, pre-packed suitcase from the hall and walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. Charlotte was left sitting in the echoing silence of her monument to wealth, the divorce papers sitting in front of her, a final testament to her spectacular self-destruction. While the Wexlers' meticulously curated world was being systematically dismantled by the consequences of their own actions, Alice Vance's was ascending to a new zenith. Her keynote speech at the Geneva World Aviation Symposium was more than a success. It was a watershed moment. Standing before the industry's most powerful figures, she did not merely present data on a new, composite material. With effortless command and infectious passion, she painted a vivid picture of the future, a future of aviation that was not only faster and stronger, but also quieter, more sustainable, and more accessible. She spoke of her journey, the challenges overcome, and the limitless potential that arises when innovation is untethered from convention. The standing ovation that followed was long and thunderous, an undeniable acknowledgement from her peers that she was not just a participant in their industry, but its preeminent visionary. The formal announcement of the landmark partnership between Vance Aeronautics and Sterling Airlines came the following day. It was the headline of every major financial news outlet, a staggering $50 billion deal that promised to redefine long-haul travel for the next generation. The markets reacted with explosive enthusiasm. Vance Aeronautics' stock surged, transforming the company she had built from the ground up into a global powerhouse and making Alice, on paper, one of the wealthiest self-made women on the planet. A week later, Alice was back in her true element. The sun-drenched, open-plan headquarters of Vance Aeronautics in New York. The office was a physical manifestation of her philosophy, all clean lines, glass walls, and collaborative spaces, fostering transparency and the free flow of ideas. The air buzzed with a palpable energy, a mixture of celebration and renewed purpose. As she walked through the main engineering bay, conversations would pause, and she would be met with beaming smiles and heartfelt congratulations from her team. These were the people who had been with her for years, who had shared her belief when it was just a theory on a whiteboard. Seeing the pride in their eyes was more gratifying than any stock ticker. Settled in her corner office, which offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, Alice was reviewing quarterly projections when her executive assistant announced a call from Julian Sterling. She smiled, taking the call. "Julian, good to hear from you. I was just admiring our new stock price." A warm chuckle came through the receiver. "As was I, Alice. It seems our partnership is off to a flying start. But I was calling about another matter. Something a bit more terrestrial." His tone shifted subtly, becoming more serious. "I felt you had a right to know. My office has been kept abreast of the situation regarding the Wexlers, and the fallout has been comprehensive." Alice leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting towards the distant silhouette of the Statue of Liberty. As Julian gave her a brief, factual summary of the events, Robert's ousting from his own company, the swift bankruptcy of Wexler Logistics, the forced sale of their home, the divorce, she listened in a heavy silence. He relayed the information without a trace of triumphalism, his voice colored only by a somber gravity. A complex tapestry of emotions wove through her. There was no joy, no satisfying sting of revenge. Instead, there was a profound and weary sadness. She pictured Charlotte Wexler, not as the snarling aggressor on the plane, but as a woman so consumed by a hollow sense of superiority that she had burned her own world to the ground for the sake of a moment's prejudice. She thought of the sheer, pointless waste of it all. 2 lives ruined, a family legacy destroyed, all fueled by a hatred as baseless as it was absolute. "Thank you for telling me, Julian," she said, her voice soft. "It's a tragic outcome. Truly." "It is," he affirmed. "But it was an outcome of their own making. That kind of prejudice is a poison, Alice. It corrodes everything it touches. Sometimes the only cure is for the host to be consumed by it." There was a brief pause on the line before his voice regained its characteristic warmth and energy. "But that is the past. I called because I want to talk about the future. On a much brighter note, I wanted to discuss an idea with you. An opportunity. That incident on the flight. It crystallized something for me. I feel Sterling Airlines has a responsibility to do more than just enforce policy. We need to be proactive. We need to build the world we want to fly in, not just react to the one we have." Intrigued, Alice sat forward. "I'm listening." "We want to partner with Vance Aeronautics again," Julian continued, "but this time on a different kind of venture. We want to launch a new foundation, the Ascension STEM Scholarship. It would be a multi-million-dollar endowment, a joint fund from both our companies, dedicated to providing full 4-year scholarships for underprivileged students, with a focus on young women and minorities, to pursue degrees in aerospace engineering, materials science, and aviation technology at the best universities in the country: MIT, Caltech, Stanford, wherever the brightest minds are." Alice's breath caught in her throat. The elegance of the idea, its perfect, symmetrical justice, was stunning. It wasn't about punishing the past, it was about investing in a future where the past could not repeat itself. It was taking the ugliness of that moment and using it as fertilizer for a whole forest of opportunity. It was the most powerful and constructive response imaginable. Her vision blurred for a moment as emotion welled up inside her: gratitude, hope, and a fierce sense of purpose. "Julian," she said, her voice thick with feeling, "that is a magnificent idea. I'm in. 100%. The story of that flight concludes not in the wreckage of the Wexlers' lives, but 6 months later, at the formal launch event for the Ascension Scholarship, held in the soaring atrium of the National Air and Space Museum. The room was filled with journalists, academics, and industry leaders, but Alice's attention was fixed on the front row. Seated there were the Foundation's inaugural class of 10 scholars. They were a vibrant mosaic of America's future. A brilliant young woman from a small town in Appalachia who had taught herself calculus. A first-generation student from East LA whose parents were farm workers. A young man from the south side of Chicago who had built a drone from salvaged parts. Their faces, a diverse collection of backgrounds and ethnicities, were alight with a mixture of awe, excitement, and the fierce, brilliant hope of those who have been given a chance to achieve the impossible. As Julian Sterling spoke at the podium, outlining the Foundation's mission, Alice's gaze drifted from one student to the next. In their eyes, she saw a reflection of her own journey. The same hunger to learn, the same drive to build, the same refusal to be defined by circumstances. She thought back to that moment on the plane, to Charlotte Wexler's face, contorted with a rage born of pure ignorance. Charlotte had looked at her and had seen only an anomaly, a threat to her privilege, an error in the social code she held so dear. She couldn't see the engineer, the CEO, the innovator. She saw only what her prejudice allowed her to see. But looking at these students, Alice felt a profound sense of peace and certainty. Charlotte Wexler and her worldview were not the establishment. They were the past. They were a dying ember, while these students were a rising flame. She, Dr. Alice Vance, was not the exception to the rule. She was the proof of a new one being written. When it was her turn to speak, she walked to the podium and looked directly at the 10 young faces before her. "They say the sky is the limit," she began, her voice ringing with a clear, calm authority. "But for you, it is not the limit. It is the beginning. It is your laboratory, your canvas, your future. Don't just reach for it. Redesign it." In that moment, standing before the next generation she was now helping to lift up, Alice knew the true meaning of her success. It was not in the stock price or the accolades. It was in the transformation of an act of destructive hate into a lasting legacy of constructive hope. The future was taking flight, and it was more brilliant than ever. And so, Charlotte Wexler's world, built on a foundation of prejudice and social status, was dismantled piece by piece, not by a grand act of revenge, but by the simple, unstoppable momentum of her own toxicity. This story is a powerful reminder that true class has nothing to do with the price of your ticket, your designer suit, or the balance in your bank account. It's about character. It's about how you treat people, especially those you believe have nothing to offer you. Dr. Alice Vance didn't need to destroy the Wexlers. Their own hatred did the work for her. She simply continued to soar, and in the end used her power not for retribution, but to build a better, more equitable future. What did you think of the hard karma delivered in this story? Was it deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories where arrogance and prejudice get exactly what's coming to them, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a tale of justice being served. Thank you for listening.